didn't know myself. And so it didn't feel at the time, I mean, from the time that I went on a first date with my first husband to the time we were married was probably 4 months.
Have you ever seen someone living an amazing life and thought to yourself, how'd they get so lucky? If you are not currently living a life that's on your terms, a life by your design, then this podcast series is for you. This is the More Confidence with Luna Guy podcast. And in this special season, I'm going to be interviewing people who are living a life by design, living a life on their terms. And I'm going to find out once and for all if it is just luck or there's something more going on. Let's dive in. Stephanie, for a lot of people who are on the LGBTIQA plus spectrum, the alphabet army, they would think that coming out could be potentially a really big deal, let alone someone who's come from a fundamentalist, a fundamentalist religion. How did you get so lucky that you can now live a life as an out and proud lesbian, despite the fact that you came from what some people might call a cult?
Yeah, I don't know if it initially was luck. I was with my youngest son's father and had realized that I was a lesbian, and he outed me to literally everyone. So he outed me to my family. He outed me to I was the PTA president at the time. He outed me to the school. He outed me to everyone.
The husband.
Yeah. Yes. So we had not been very married for a very long time. And there's this kind of whole long story behind it. So I had worked for him for a long time, and he was quite a bit older than me and had always pursued me. And as I was going through my divorce with a 6-week-old child, he kind of swooped in, and then I was 22, and I just, I was coming out of a religion, I was coming out of a marriage, I was trying to figure out who I was, and next thing I know, I'm pregnant with my third child. And so we ended up in a longer term relationship. And I knew that I liked women. We had kind of an open relationship. I had a girlfriend on the side that he was well aware of. And we got married. And within 6 months, I was like, this isn't a life I can live. But then he outed me to literally everybody. So it wasn't necessarily by choice that I came out, but it worked out for the best, I guess, in the end.
So talk me through that. You're just say 20, 22, even 21. You're married to your first husband. You've got 2 children. You're leaving the Church of the Jehovah's Witness.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize in that moment that that you like women, that you're attracted to women, and that you don't want to be in your first marriage. Is that right?
At that point, I had not realized that I really liked women. So I got married 2 weeks after I turned 18, had my first child at 19. And at 22, we were having some financial issues. He was spending a lot of money on his truck, putting all of these accessories on it. And in that religion, the elders are very, very involved. And so they'd come over to counsel us. And we were struggling to put food on the table. We had I was pregnant at that point, and we had a toddler, and we were kids. So we weren't making a ton of money, right? We're working like menial jobs basically. And the elders told me that if I respected my husband more, then he would respect me like he respected his truck. And at that point, I said, get the fuck out of my house. To both of them, the elders and my husband, said I want a divorce, go find an apartment. And by the time he came back, I had all the shit packed up.
Stephanie, I mean, were you born into Jehovah's Witness?
I was.
So talk me through and ask the audience here. You're 19 years of age. You're a very young woman who has been indoctrinated into a culture, into a religion, into a community for your whole entire life. You would have been told that women are subservient to men, and that men are more important, and just like the elder came and said, if you respected your husband more, he might give you more respect like he does the truck.
Correct.
In that moment, you say, get fucked. How did you get from, your whole worldview has been supported, by Jehovah's Witness to that point where then you tell them to get fucked at the age of 19? It's pretty brave.
Yeah, I think it was, rage. But it was also my dad is really a huge influence in my life. And my dad, even though he truly believes in the religion and the morals of the religion, he's not active in the religion.
Okay.
And so he really raised me to truly, think independently, be
Mm,
strong, be independent, that I could do anything a man could do, right? And then my mother comes along and it's like, smile and be pretty and land a man, because that's your only saving grace in this world, right?
yeah.
And so I got a very mixed message, but I really was very disconnected from my mother and very close to my father. And I think that that's the sole difference of what landed me to that moment. And my father also knew. I mean, he knew I was getting married too young. He said, I don't think that you're making the right decision.
Mm,
Um, and so I knew at that moment, outside of leaving the religion, I knew leaving my marriage, I would have his support at least, right? And so I knew that I still had a support system.
yeah.
Um, that fell away whenever I came out as a lesbian. But at this point in time, I knew that I had that.
Okay, so at 19, you know you've got your dad, and probably surprisingly, you've got the man who is supporting his daughter to be as equal. Your mum
Mm-hmm.
wants you to be pretty and get married because that's where your value is.
Mm-hmm.
You tell the elders and your husband to get fucked. You leave. You leave that relationship. And when did you realize that you were gay?
So I left the religion and my relationship around 22, and at that point was when I had ended up. So I went back to work because I was not working at the time. So I'd had my daughter, went
Mm,
back to work, and my boss, essentially, he was one of the owners of the company who had pursued me for quite some time. Um, Made a move, and I was in a really, I mean, I'll be honest, he was 14 years older than me, and he got me drunk one night, and I wasn't, I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses don't really drink, so it was a little bit predatory, but we ended up in this relationship, and I ended up pregnant with my third child. And so at
with
the age
him.
with him, yeah. And he had, he took me to a strip club, and he was like, I think you like girls. And I was like, no, I don't. That's wrong. Like, it's no, you know? And then realized that I did and pursued that. And so during the time of our relationship, I had a girlfriend that he knew about. Um, and then at 25, again, that meltdown of like, that's when I'm pregnant with my third child. And I'm like, what am I doing with my life?
Mm.
Not the life I want to live. And so we ended up separating and divorcing and all of the things when I was 27. And that year was the year that basically everything, my whole life burned to the ground. So,
Wow. Wow, your whole life burns to the ground. You've had two marriages by that point, two divorces
mhm,
by that point. You've got three kids at by 27?
correct.
Three kids by 27. Did you ever imagine at that point when your life was about to burn down that that's how you'd like this is how life was going to be? When you were 15, 19, 22, did you ever think that you were going to be gay with two divorces under your belt?
Never. I never even thought I'd get married and have kids. Like, I just didn't
Yeah.
see that for my future. And then it just was the trajectory that ended up where my life ended up going. Yeah,
Mm.
so, and I think that that was when I had kind of my meltdown at 25. I was like, being pregnant, I was like, this is just never how I saw my life, right?
Yeah.
Like, I never saw it here.
And what led you to, being that you'd never seen your life to be that way, to get married, to have kids, what do you think compelled you to go down that path initially?
Tradition, tradition. That was the
Mm.
expectation.
What was that pressure like?
I was so young. I mean, I was so young. I didn't know myself. And so it
Mm.
didn't feel at the time. I mean, from the time that I went on a first date with my first husband to the time we were married was probably 4 months.
Okay.
It was a very, like, everything was very quick and whirlwind at that
Mm.
time. Partly because of being young, partly because the religion is so, you don't really date. You get, like, you're dating with the intent of getting married. And so they
Yeah.
kind of push you together, right? And you don't. really have time to get to know each other.
Mm, mm,
And there's nothing, I mean, you're not allowed to make out, like and you're a kid, right?
yeah.
So like, of course you're going to get married. That's the next logical thing to do.
There seems to be, Steph, that there was always this undercurrent for you, though. There's this, what the world, your world, in this case was, your religion and your community. There was the rules of the world that you lived in. You're not going to date, you're courting to be married. You have probably very little choice in that. Men are, are superior to you. Was there an undertone that you felt? You said that you never actually saw yourself becoming married and having kids. What was the undertone that was going on behind the scenes of that outward picture of what you had to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me it was I'm very inquisitive and I ask
Mm,
a lot of questions. And so I got baptized at 14, and I wanted to be baptized at 14, right? Like it was my choice.
mm,
Uh, but then I started asking questions that couldn't be answered.
mm,
And then I wanted to know more and I wanted to learn more. And you're not allowed to learn about other religions, and you're not allowed to really ask questions. And my mom was not raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and came into the church at 27 or 29, like much older, right? And didn't want to talk about her past, didn't want to talk about any of that. And I was like, there's this whole world that exists. And if this is my whole thing was, if this is really the truth, and if this religion stands the test of time, why can I not ask questions? And why can I not read about Buddhism as an example? Because it
mm.
should stand up, right? And there's just the answer was constantly have faith. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that on this. So the undercurrent was kind of I never really fit in, I guess. I was always considered, stubborn and headstrong and rebellious um and difficult. And I just was like, I was okay with that.
Yeah, no, I was curious about that, because that can often lead us to have feelings of inferiority, that like we don't fit in, there's something wrong with us. What was it like for you? You said that you were okay with it, you were this rebellious, headstrong, just actually curious individual who wasn't willing to be brainwashed. What was it like for you to be so different from your community?
I didn't have a lot of friends. So
Mm,
that's right. And I guess like I felt insecure a lot in my 20s. Like I would say it took me until probably my early 30s to really find my voice and to
mm,
be confident in who I was as a person. Um, because a lot of that was right, I didn't get to explore any of who you are. I didn't get to do any of those normal teenage things. And
mm,
at a really young age, I mean, there's the religion, but then there's also my mom and dad. We lived in Texas and the economy fell, and my dad had to leave the state to find work. And at that point, my mother decided to basically fall off of the planet in a weird way. So she started drinking heavily and um, just kind of lost her mind, honestly. We
yeah.
sold her the washer and dryer to have her nails done. And so I'm taking care of myself at 12, my brother who's 10, and my sister who's now like, you know, a baby, like she's little. And so
Mm.
it threw me into also just kind of wanting to get out of the situation. I was like, I think that initially getting married was kind of an out, which is interesting though,
Yep.
because as I say that, I was kicked out of the house at 16, so I was already living on my own.
Mm.
So but it was still like this, it felt like the only option I had to have some normalcy.
Yeah.
And then I just, yeah, I don't know, wasn't it wasn't normal.
Yeah, it wasn't normal. So you've obviously got this Jehovah's Witness mum who is, drinking. Your father's out of state. Obviously Jehovah's Witness don't drink. So there's all this huge levels of uncertainty. You don't have the opportunity to really discover or explore who you are. We fast forward however many years now, right? We fast forward and you you have a close relationship with your kids, with your family, and you live life on your terms authentically. You
Yes.
like you travel the world and you coach busy mums to master time and create space for what matters, their health and their relationships. I'm hearing that, you leaving the church was one thing, you leaving, and moving beyond, getting divorced and having those situations was one thing. What happened when then you realized that you were actually gay?
Yeah, so I kind of went through a period with my youngest son's father where, like I said, I had a girlfriend on the side, and so I had decided, not decided, but like 27, 25 to 27. It took me about a year or so. I really was just like, this isn't, I can't live this. It feels like a lie and it doesn't feel authentic. And so came out to him, and then he outed me to everyone, which was okay. I mean, I knew the consequence of what was going to happen, right? I just really, I guess, thought that I'd have a little bit more time than I did, but
Mm,
I didn't. So at that point, I lost friends, my family, my community, right? I was asked to step down from the PTA because this was in the 90s when it wasn't still acceptable.
mhm,
And so I really had the opportunity, and I think this is probably, there's two things that were the biggest changes in my life that got me to here, and this is one of them. I had the opportunity because of our financial situation to really take the year off, and we also owned a company together. So I left the company and was able to just be. So I,
wow.
cried and journaled and redecorated the house, and like was able to do things to really figure out, like, and grieve that life and
Mm,
grieve that family, and really just be in that grief and be able to come out of it. Um so that was a big piece that got me to where I am now, and I was able to really sit in that and heal, right? When I did go through my first divorce, my oldest was having a lot of um really aggressive behavior and really destructive behavior. And so he was 2.5 at the time, and I put him in therapy, which was so like unheard of in
yeah,
my
the
life.
90s, right? Like, I mean, even in the 2000s or 2010s, you didn't put your kids in therapy. No one went to
Yeah,
therapy, in those days.
right. But he was like banging his head against the wall. He was ripping up toys, like things that I was like, there, I don't know how to help him.
Mm,
And because he was so little, it was play therapy. So I was in the room with him, and one day leaving, the therapist touched my shoulder and she said, if you don't get therapy, he will never heal. And I was like, I am fine. What's
excuse
your
me,
problem?
what?
Yeah. But I went home and I thought about it, and I was like, and I was a little bit mad. I was a little bit mad. I was a little bit offended. And I went back to her and I said, what do you mean? And she said, you're very emotionally shut off, and you have never, like, you clearly have trauma that you've never dealt with.
Wow.
So that put me into therapy. And I swear I am the biggest cheerleader for therapy of any person on the planet. I'm the only person who's consistently gone to therapy in my family, and
Mhm.
I think that that's hands down the reason I've been able to heal relationships with my father and my aunt and my grandmother and my kids. And I am super close to my kids now, but that's it was a skill set I had to learn.
Yeah. And, there's these moments that I think that people could hear in your story. Oh, well, that was lucky that when you had the second divorce, that you were able to take it 12 months off, well, that was lucky. Or it was lucky that, you got that tap on the shoulder from that therapist at that point in time. If someone was to describe that moment as that therapist tapping you on the shoulder being luck, what would be your response to that?
My response would say that sometimes I think people come across you in the world and they give you a message if you're open to hearing it.
Yeah.
Because I had, because I wanted so badly to not repeat the way I had grown up,
Mm,
I was willing to do whatever it took to make sure that my kids had a healthier version of a childhood.
yeah.
And if I weren't in that space, I don't know that I would have heard that message.
And I want every listener at home to really get this. It's the reason I asked you about it, Stephanie, because you know those taps on the shoulder, we are getting them all the time. Universe, God, whatever you want to call life, is asking us to raise ourselves, to go to the next level, and we get the opportunity to choose.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has made you continue to choose the path of growth, of evolution, of going down something like the path of therapy that, let's face it, is bloody uncomfortable.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Like, why would we do it? Why would we go down the path of personal development and expansion when it's difficult, it's hard, and it's often awful?
It is. That's true. I really just, I don't know that I necessarily believe that this is our one life, but I
Mm,
do believe that this is our one life that we have right now, right? And sometimes
yeah.
it's short.
Uh-huh.
And why not better
Mm.
yourself? And also, it's better for the planet. Like it's better for the human
Yeah.
collective. The
Yeah.
healthier that we are, that each of us are, the more we show up from love and grace, and the more we can be accepting of differences. I mentioned that I grew up in Texas, and when we moved to Seattle the very first summer, I mean, I grew up in a pretty small town that
Mm.
it was very, very white. And we moved to Seattle and I saw an interracial couple holding hands and my mind was blown. I'd never I had never been exposed to those things. And I think sometimes life puts you in situations where you can expand your mind. And sometimes we have to do the work ourselves.
Yeah.
And oftentimes a combination of both. And so I think that that's really the biggest reason. And I don't want to say I've had a lot of loss because I haven't, but the loss that I've had in my life has been really personal to me
And
and
significant, yeah.
insignificant. And it's, I just don't want to wait until it's too late to live.
Mm. Mm. You were outed at 27,
Mm-hmm.
right? Almost, well, forced into effectively coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Was that talk to me about that time in your life? Was it a difficult time? Was it a relieving time? When you look back on that 27-year-old version of Stephanie, what do you remember about her and what she was experiencing?
It was really difficult. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to find my way in the world.
Mm,
I'd been in the same industry since I was 19 and I didn't know anything else, right?
mm,
I didn't go to school. I went to obviously high school, but I didn't go to college.
yeah.
So I didn't know like what I was going to do with my life. I
Mm,
essentially again was outed from even the industry that I was in. Everybody took his side. I was being so horrible to him, and I would never understand how he felt. And I just was like,
mm,
this just isn't normal. Like not everybody thinks this way, right? I was like, I am in this weird bubble. Like, not
yes.
everybody feels like this. Um, and so by taking that time, which I understand like how privileged that is and how that is a very fortunate thing. It also is
Mm,
a terrifying time. I had three kids under the age of 8.
mm-hmm.
I was living in a house that I knew I couldn't afford, and so I was going to have to move and sell,
Yep.
which I'd never done on my own. I had never lived on my own ever because I got married so young, and even when I was
Mm-hmm.
kicked out at 16, I lived with roommates. I'd never been by myself,
Yeah.
um, and so and then not being able to call your parents and say like,
Mm,
hey, like, can I bring the kids over for dinner? I mean, there were times during that year that not even during that year, I guess probably like a couple of years after, but like there were times where I would scrape together change to pay for gas
yeah.
because I didn't have a support system, right? And I wasn't making enough money to support three kids. And at the
Mm,
time, I was getting like $300 a month in child support was it. And so I was, struggling. And all you can do with that, I mean, I'm a survivor, I guess, at the end of the day,
yeah.
right? You just do what it takes so that your kids don't know that there's a struggle. And
Mm,
right, I remember going to IHOP because it was like 99-cent pancake night for kids and I wouldn't eat. And it was just because I was like, this is what we can afford for dinner, right? And you survive all that stuff and it makes you stronger and all of that. But it's there's a from the outside view, I think there is a privilege to it. And I certainly am very grateful for that time to be able to grieve and heal. However, it was also a very, very terrifying and very lonely time.
yeah. And I think it really speaks to this. darkness that we go through with massive transformation.
Mm-hmm.
When we are starting to carve our own path, and in this case, in a lot of ways you were forced into it, although you were already speaking to that, within your relationship, you had a girlfriend, you were already coming to terms with that, to your sexuality already for yourself. Obviously, it just sped up the process. But I think that very often we can overlook the darkness, that real heavy period of time that we go through when we experience massive transformation on the path to being our most authentic self. So I don't want to skip over that part. What for you? What nearly broke you during that period of time, do you think?
My dad would show up at my door periodically, and because I think partly just his personality, and I think partly the religion, um, I was still his child to him, right?
Mm,
So he would
mm.
knock on the door. He was like, you're not going to do this. And I was like, yeah, I am. So it
As in,
came.
you're not going to do being gay? Is that right?
Yeah, you're not going to be gay. You can move back home. And I was like, I
Mm,
can't move. I have three kids, and you guys don't want me to be part of this, like, right? So I have to choose. I can go back into being a Jehovah's Witness, or I can be authentic to who I am. And
yeah.
in that, but that was a really hard time for me because he really was just he didn't understand it. And he was very much like, this, you're just not going to do it. I'm going to put my
Mm,
foot down. And I was like, yeah, I'm not, that's not how this works at this point in time, like I'm actually an adult now. And, but that was hard because I also knew it was heartbreaking for him.
mm,
So, and I knew he didn't
mm.
understand, and I had family members. My grandmother called me and just, you know, told me how disappointed she was in me and that she couldn't speak to me anymore. And I knew that. I knew that going into it. I knew that
Yeah.
that would be the case. I never expected it to be verbalized.
How have you stayed strong in not your conviction, because your sexuality is your sexuality. It's like someone coming to you and say you're not allowed to be white. Well, there's not much you can do about that, right? Like, here you are. That's the truth of the matter is. So there's not much you can do about. Obviously, you can not, quote, practice your sexuality, and you can force yourself to be with a man when you don't want to be. That is possible, but that wouldn't change the fact that you're gay.
Right.
How did you remain, with a sense of self-worth and a sense of self-esteem, when one of the very essence parts of who you are, your sexuality, was being blatantly rejected by the people that you loved the most?
Um, I just felt like I couldn't live any other way. So at that
Mm,
point in time, it was like, I mean, honestly, just again, survival and like out of necessity because I needed, I have a really hard time. I have a really hard time always in life not being really transparent. And so living like this facade was just something I couldn't do. Not
mm,
at that point in time. I will say though, on that, and so just to be really clear, so I was in a relationship with a woman for about 10 years, and
mm,
then we broke up. And at that point, I was like, man, I can't do that either. Like, that's like, it was so right, difficult that I ended up in a relationship with a man, and he had kids, and it was a stepmom, and he knew all of my past and my background. And when we broke up, I was just like, this isn't, you just have to be true to who you are. Like,
yeah.
right, there's no like one answer for anything in this world. You just have to be true to who you are and what feels right. And so I
Mm,
was single for a while, and then met my now girlfriend, and that was the right time and the right person and all of the right things. But um, I think that was also still part of that healing process for me.
mm.
And also learning like my patterns, because I remember after he and I broke up, I went back to therapy and I was like, okay, so it doesn't matter if I'm with a man or a woman, I'm picking the same type of partner.
I'm still there.
So
It's
what
still
is,
me.
yeah, it's still
Like,
me.
all of these things, it's Taylor Swift. Oh, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me,
Yep.
like the anti-hero. Like,
Yep.
oh, I didn't realize, like, I'm still here. Crumbs. I
Yep.
think it probably there's a link here.
Yeah, and I had to do that work, and that was super uncomfortable work. But that's also like, again, I was like, I don't want to keep repeating these patterns, and I don't want to set these examples for my kids. And so,
Fab.
yeah, that was, and in that's again a big piece of what led me to where I am now, of just what feels right for you outside the context of what everybody else thinks you should be
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
You know.
Because you've done that a lot, Stephanie, in your life. You've gone outside of the context of what everybody thinks that you should be doing. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, challenging the church and challenging the way things are thinking. Even when you were 10, 12, 14, asking questions that you, quote, weren't allowed to ask. And then eventually, telling one of the elders to get effed and leaving that relationship. I'm seeing there's this kind of like there's the external pressure of sometimes you would acquiesce and then you're like, I can't live like this. So you would break out, but then your old
Mm-hmm.
patterns would keep you miserable again. So you might go back to the old way and you would go in and you'd go out. This is, the story of expansion and growth. You you were also rejected by the lesbian community at one point in time. Is that right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's frustrating. I feel like the lesbian community still sort of does this. I look too
Mm,
straight, right? I don't look gay enough. I don't
yeah.
act gay enough. I had kids. That has changed. That piece has changed a lot. I'd say over the last maybe 5 to 10 years. But back
Mm,
in when I came out, if you had kids, you were not at all. And it's interesting to me because here's what I find so fascinating about this is because I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness,
mm,
I really have had very few partners, right? Like I don't, I just have. I've had very few partners.
yeah.
Most lesbians I know have slept with more men than I've ever even considered sleeping with. And I'm like, but yet you reject me because I had a child with one.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, so it was a weird thing. It was because
Yeah.
then I didn't know where I belonged, right? I didn't have a community necessarily.
Yeah, because rejection from one, not accepted by the other. I mean, as a Bible woman myself, can completely resonate with that. Like straight to like you're invisible. It doesn't make any sense. You're with a man, that means you must be straight. Or when I'm with a woman, I must be gay. And it's like, no, actually, I'm bi, irrelevant of who I'm with. But then sometimes the gay community would be the same. Like, no, you can't dip your toe in both ponds. That doesn't work that way. Like you like choose one. It's like, well, sorry, I can't. It doesn't. It,
Yeah.
it isn't that. So, how have you found for yourself, Stephanie, to belong to you? That real foundation sense of you coming home to you, rather than always. Community is important, but how have you found your own footing in a world that doesn't always necessarily accept you as you are?
I'm just going to go back to therapy, right? And doing the inner work and really figuring out what matters to you and then
Mm,
learning to live your life by those values. And I
nice.
think that those values stay pretty much the same for most of us through our whole
Mm-hmm.
life. Um, but I think until you figure out what those are to you personally, sometimes we waffle and we don't exactly know, or we try to go against what is truly important to us.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of deep work.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, maybe, Stephanie, is that you're a really big advocate for therapy.
Yes, yes, I am.
So maybe we ought to do the work, and I mean, I'm a huge advocate of that. And I don't always necessarily, when I say the word therapy, I don't necessarily mean with a counselor or psychologist exclusively.
Right.
Like work with a coach, work with equine therapy, go do medicine, embark in yoga, take a spiritual journey, whatever it happens to be. Do something to be unpacking your trauma of your childhood, irrelevant of whether or not you think it was traumatic. It was to some
Mm-hmm.
to some extent. There's conditioning and programming that has landed in you. Unpack it. Unpack it.
Mm-hmm.
See what ones you want to keep, which ones you want to, what beliefs and stories and conditioning you want to put back in your bag to take with you for the rest of it, and what needs to stay behind.
Exactly.
You now, all these years, have gone by. You've obviously forged your way through the fire. You've been forged through the fire. You're now in a healthy relationship with your loved ones. Obviously, nothing's perfect. I get that. We're not putting you on this pedestal to say, "Look at Stephanie. She's got no problems. Everything's great." Like You will just continue to do the work. But what you do, Stephanie, is that you're a life coach for busy mums. You teach time mastery for those mums. You help them to master their time so they can focus on what really matters, which is their health and their relationships. What's important to you about doing this work?
Ooh, I think that mothers die, women die on the altar of motherhood. And
Oof.
I, yeah, I can't, we need to flip the script, right? We women, as a general rule, do more than men in life, in office settings, in work settings, in home settings. And then you add on motherhood to it, and women on average do an additional 40 hours of work a week in the home, and men do an average of 2. And we're keeping that generational cycle going by showing our daughters that only the girls do all of the work and cook and clean and all of the things, and we're teaching our sons that they don't have to pick up after themselves or cook and clean, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot more that goes into a house. So I believe, when I was a stepmom, I had 5 kids in the house, ages 1 through 16, under 4 parenting plans, going to 3 different schools in 2 different cities, and I was a full-time manager at a Starbucks. Life was busy, right? And busy. So I had to get really clear on how to organize the house so that it could be clean and we could have food and the laundry was done. And that took getting the kids involved, and it took me saying like how I needed help. And I ended up in the ER with a migraine. I never had a migraine. Woke up, I'd had a headache for like 3 weeks, not knowing that that was a migraine. One day I wake up and I can't, tears are running down my face because it hurts to breathe. It hurts to lay down. It hurts to sit up. It hurts to look at light. All of it hurts. And it was because I wasn't taking care of myself. Like I was literally exhausted and dehydrated. I say simple, like it was that simple. Like I was not taking care of myself.
To change, but simple in its execution.
Exactly. And that's when I was like, you know what, this is ridiculous. Like you guys are all able to be a part of this and take care of things as well and be responsible, right? You can make your own bed and you can put your own clothes away and you can help set the table and help cook and all of those things.
You can take the bins out, you can unstack the dishwasher, you can do the dishes, you can vacuum, there's a whole bunch self-responsibility here.
Ton of stuff. And I realized that the reason I hadn't had the kids involved in any of that was because I was a perfectionist, right? I wanted the towels to be folded and put away a certain way. I wanted the drawers to look a certain way. And I was like, at the end of the day, who cares, right? Like Fabulous. Who cares if it's perfect? And so I had to let go of that myself. And so it's important to me because I talk to so many moms that are so on the verge of burnout and exhaustion and overwhelm. And they're shuttling kids around and they're eating at 10 o'clock at night, whatever was left over on the kids' plate, or they have all the guilt because they went through the drive-through again because they didn't have time to go to the grocery store. And that can change, and it can change with some really simple systems put into place. And again, by getting the whole family involved, which sounds more daunting, I think, to a lot of moms than it actually is.
Yeah. And so with your strategies and your techniques and your coaching, you can really show mums how to liberate themselves from the tortures of their perfectionism so that they can get their time back to focus on health and relationships. Where can people find you, Stephanie?
So I am I'm known as the Boundaries Babe because it's a lot of boundaries coaching. So I'm pretty much everywhere. You can find me either at the Boundaries Babe or at Steph the Boundaries Babe.
Fabulous. Well, we'll put that all in the show notes anyway, so people can go ahead and find you. Stephanie, to close today's conversation, if you were to describe how living life on your terms, if you would talk about living life on your terms in just 5 words, be them concurrent in a sentence or otherwise, what 5 words would you use?
Don't give a fuck about anybody else's opinion.
Nice. Nice. I love it. I love it. Stephanie Jones, thank you so much for being here on the More Confidence with Luna Guy podcast. This has been a special series of How'd You Get So Lucky? And really, what we can see here is that luck has very little to do with it. It's more about commitment, conviction, dedication, and, deciding that you need to live a life that's authentic to you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the More Confidence with Luna Guy podcast. I hope you feel more confident, more self-assured, and ready to go tackle the world's problems and maybe kick ass in some of your dreams. If you haven't already, I would love for you to like and subscribe, follow, and maybe leave a review so that other people know how to find this awesome podcast too. If you're wanting to sink your teeth into something even more juicy, my #1 best-selling book, Perfectly Imperfect, Your Complete Guide to Loving Yourself and Loving Your Body, is now available on all good bookstore sites, both in print, digital, and I narrated it for Audible as well. If you think that coaching or maybe one of my courses is for you, why not head to www.moreconfidence.com.au and get in touch and see if we can talk. And of course, you can find me all across the social medias. That's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, which is where you're probably listening now, or maybe even here on the podcast platform. Sending you big love and wishing you a beautiful day.